What farm worker Dylan Cross found on a freezing October morning would shatter and transform everything he thought about second chances, forever changing the life of a man who would walk through a gym door 800 kilometers away. These two stories are deeply interconnected, not only saving lives but proving that even the most broken souls can find their way back to hope. Before we begin this incredible story, write in the comments where you're watching us from, and if this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. What happens next will amaze you, and you won't want to miss what's coming. The morning mist hung over Copper Ridge like a gray funeral shroud, and Dylan Cross pulled his worn denim jacket tighter against the October cold as he walked the fence line of the old Whitmore farm. At 38, Dylan had the cracked hands of a man who had spent his life working with wire and wood, fixing what others had broken, and coaxing life from stubborn soil. His lean frame moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned that haste only led to more problems, and the deep lines around his green eyes spoke of too many sleepless nights counting bills he couldn't pay. The Whitmore farm had been his home for 3 years, ever since old Benjamin Whitmore had taken pity on him and offered him work in exchange for the small cabin behind the main house. It wasn't much, but for a man with nowhere else to go and a past he wanted to forget, wrapping himself in barbed wire and morning chores was salvation. It was the only way to get away from his head, from his thoughts. Dylan had been walking the same fence line since dawn, checking for breaks in the wire that separated Whitmore's property from the national forest beyond. The work was solitary and methodical, exactly the kind of routine that kept his mind from drifting to darker places. The sun had just begun to burn through the mist when he heard a sound. At first it came faintly, almost like wind moaning through the pines, but there was something distinctly alive in it, something suffering. Dylan stopped walking and tilted his head to the side, listening. The sound came again, this time clearer, and with a jolt, he realized it was the labored breathing of something large, something struggling. Following the sound, he advanced deeper into the forest, his boots crunching on the carpet of fallen leaves. The breathing rose with each step, now accompanied by a faint metallic sound, striking wood. Dylan's heart began to race as he pushed through a dense thicket of wild plums, emerging into a small clearing dominated by a massive oak tree that had been standing since before Montana was a state. What he saw there would never leave his mind for the rest of his life. At the base of the oak, collapsed, was the largest horse Dylan had ever seen in his life. The animal was easily 18 hands high, maybe more, its coat so black it seemed to absorb the pale morning light. But what made Dylan's stomach turn more than anything were the heavy, thick ropes and chains wrapped around the horse. Tied up, abandoned, left alone. The neglect was evident from every angle. Its neglect was noticeable, its ribs sharply visible beneath the black coat. The horse's breathing was shallow and irregular. It was clear it hadn't eaten properly for days, maybe weeks. A massive hoof dragged weakly on the ground, the only sign that the animal was still fighting to survive. But what stopped Dylan's heart was the piece of paper tied around the heavy rope on the horse's neck. With trembling hands, he opened the note, squinting to read the hastily scrawled words. His name is Goliath. I can't feed him anymore. Too big, too wild, too much trouble. Maybe someone else can save him. I'm sorry. His hand trembled as he folded the note and looked at the dying giant at his feet. Goliath's eyes were a deep amber color, and when they met Dylan's gaze, he saw something that pierced straight to his soul. A desperate, intelligent awareness asking a single, simple question. Are you here to help, or are you here to watch me die? Dylan had never owned a horse in his life. He could barely feed himself, let alone a 1,000-pound animal that seemed like it could eat its own weight in hay every day. The smart thing, the practical thing, would be to call the sheriff's office and let them handle it. Control would come, assess the situation, and probably decide that the kindest thing would be to put the poor creature out of its misery. But as Dylan knelt beside Goliath's massive head and looked into those amber eyes, he found himself whispering words that surprised even himself. "I'm going to get you out of here, son. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to leave you to die." The horse's ear twitched toward him, and Dylan could have sworn he saw the dimmest spark of hope ignite in those intelligent eyes. He stood up and examined the ropes more carefully, his mind trying to solve the problem. The material was old but solid, tied with a heavy knot. The ropes were wrapped so tightly around Goliath's neck and chest that they formed a net that would be impossible to escape, even for a horse of Goliath's size. Dylan ran to his cabin and came back with every tool he could carry: ratchet wrenches, wire cutters, a saw, and even an old crowbar he found in the barn. The work was slow and painstaking, and he had to stop several times when Goliath tried to struggle, afraid the animal would injure himself further. But slowly, knot by knot, he began to free the giant horse from its metal prison. As he worked, Dylan found himself talking to Goliath in a low, steady voice, just like his grandfather used to talk to frightened cattle. He told the horse about the farm, about the pasture where he could run free, about the hay and the barn and the clear stream that flowed along the property's eastern boundary. He wasn't sure if Goliath understood the words, but the horse seemed to calm at the tone of his voice, breathing more regularly as the ropes fell away. When the last rope fell to the ground with a metallic clang, Goliath didn't immediately try to stand. Instead, the big horse lay motionless, as if he couldn't believe he was truly free. Dylan sat back on his heels, sweat dripping from his forehead despite the cold morning air, and watched as Goliath slowly, carefully, began to test his newfound freedom. The horse's attempt to stand failed, his weakened legs unable to support his massive frame. But on the second try, with a groan from deep in his chest, Goliath lifted himself upward. For a moment he swayed, finding his balance, and then stood perfectly still, head high, nostrils flaring as they tested the wind for the first time without metal around his neck. Dylan expected Goliath to run away. Most horses would run the moment they were free, especially after being tied up for God knows how long. Instead, Goliath turned that magnificent head toward him and took a single, careful step in his direction. Then another and another, until he stood close enough for Dylan to feel the warmth radiating from the horse's massive body. Very slowly, Dylan raised his hand toward Goliath's nose. The horse didn't flinch or pull back. Instead, he lowered his great head and allowed Dylan to stroke his velvety soft nose, amber eyes never leaving Dylan's face. In that moment, something passed between man and horse, an understanding, a bond, the mutual recognition of two souls who knew abandonment and were ready to trust again. "Come on, Goliath," Dylan said softly. "Let's go home." That same morning, 800 kilometers away, rain beat against the windows of the small neighborhood gym with a determined rhythm, painting the glass in silver veins. Inside, the warm hum of treadmills and the smell of fresh sweat created a calm refuge from the storm. The bell above the door chimed lightly as each new customer came in, shook the water from their jackets, and settled into the comfortable area. Behind the front desk, Olivia moved with practical ease, balancing the clipboard while offering weary but genuine smiles to regular customers. Her blonde hair was pulled into a high ponytail, strands escaping to frame a face that carried more weariness than her 28 years deserved. Yet there was something kind in her eyes, something that softened even the hardest day. On a small cushion by the window sat a little girl with curly blonde hair and wide blue eyes. A box of crayons was spread out in front of her. 6-year-old Sophie was humming to herself as she colored a soccer field in the middle of a storm. Occasionally she looked toward her mother, watching her with quiet curiosity. Outside, the rain intensified. The door opened again, this time admitting a tall man in a dark gray suit, the edges wet from the downpour. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that came from boardrooms and airport lounges. His name was Nathan Collins, 30 years old, CEO of one of the country's fastest-growing tech companies. He hadn't planned to come here. It was just a detour on a business trip, a coastal drive to clear his head. But the rain had forced him into the nearest gym. He walked in, shook the water from his shoulders, and looked for a place to register. His eyes met Olivia's for a moment, too brief for recognition, and Olivia gave him a polite nod before returning to the clipboard. Sophie stopped coloring, her eyes locked on the man by the door. She stared at him, her small eyebrows furrowed, then relaxed as if something inside her was quietly settling into place. She silently slid from her chair, holding the crayon tightly in one hand. Nathan found a seat by the window, his phone already in his hand, checking messages. He didn't notice the approaching child. Sophie stood beside him for a moment, silently. Then softly, just loud enough for him to hear, she asked, "Are you my father?" Nathan's head snapped up. He looked at the little girl, bewildered, not sure if he had heard correctly. Her big blue eyes were scanning his face, expecting something, anything. But then Sophie took a step closer. She raised her small finger and pointed to the back of Nathan's left ear. "You have one too," she said softly. "Like a moon. Like mine." Nathan's heart stopped. He brought his hand to the back of his own ear, to the birthmark. Small, moon-shaped, his family's genetic signature. Then he looked at the back of Sophie's ear. The same. His breath caught. Then he looked into Sophie's eyes, really looked. One eye was dark green, the other light honey-colored, just like her mother's. Heterochromia. In the family line. Rare. This couldn't be a coincidence. Olivia, holding a water bottle, was walking toward another customer when she caught the tone of her daughter's voice. She turned just in time to see Sophie standing next to the stranger. Then she heard the words again, this time a little louder. "You have the same one. So you're my father." The water bottle slipped from Olivia's hand. It hit the floor with a thud. Water spread across the rubber floor and rolled away. The gym went silent. A few people turned to look. Olivia froze, her heart pounding, her gaze locked with Nathan's, and this time recognition came. Nathan blinked in shock, looking from the child to the woman across the room, his eyebrows furrowed. Sophie looked at him again, tilting her head. "You look like the man in my mother's picture," she whispered, "and we have the same mark." Nathan opened his mouth to speak, but said nothing. Olivia took a shaky breath, her eyes wide, color draining from her face. And outside, the rain continued to fall. Olivia couldn't move. Her heart was pounding in her chest like a drum, deafening everything around her. The sound of the bottle hitting the floor, Sophie's whisper, Nathan's shocked expression, all spinning around her like a dream she never expected to relive. She felt her knees weaken, and then, as if her mind could no longer bear the weight of the present, the world around her blurred and pulled into a memory, a time when everything was different. It was 7 years ago. Spring sunshine filtered through old university windows, warming the backs of students sitting on the athletic fields. Olivia sat cross-legged in the stands, a water bottle in her lap, her blonde hair gleaming in the sun. She was stretching after practice when a familiar shadow fell across the metal. "Is this how star athletes spend their time?" Nathan teased as he sat down beside her. Olivia rolled her eyes but smiled. "Better than watching you sleep through business class." Nathan laughed, that deep, easy laugh that Olivia loved so much. He reached into his bag beside him and pulled out a small white lily, extending it to her with an almost childish grin. "For the girl who makes even practice look poetic." He always said things like that. And though Olivia had grown up learning not to trust sweet words, somehow with Nathan, she believed every word he said. They were inseparable. Between practices and classes, they carved out a world of their own, a world filled with late-night drives, handwritten notes, and long walks under string lights hung in the campus courtyard. But love, no matter how sincere, couldn't always silence the world around it. Nathan's father, William Collins, made it clear when he first met Olivia that he didn't approve of the relationship. He didn't raise his voice or use rude words. He just looked at her. At first, Nathan resisted. He told Olivia that nothing could come between them, that his father would never dictate his future. But as the months passed, the pressure mounted. A week before graduation, Nathan met Olivia under their favorite tree by the athletic complex. This time, he didn't smile. "I'm going to London in 4 days," he said quietly. Olivia's breath caught. 4 days? But what about everything we planned? "I tried, Olivia. I swear I tried." Tears welled up in her eyes. "So that's it? After everything, you're just leaving?" Nathan looked away, his jaw tight. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I wrote you something," he said. "I can't find the words when I'm looking at you." He kissed her forehead gently, one last time. Then he turned and walked away. The days after Nathan left turned into one long ache. 2 weeks later, Olivia noticed her body felt different. She attributed it to stress, sleepless nights, tears, the way her heart refused to stop hurting after Nathan walked away. But the morning nausea, the delayed period, all pointed to one frightening truth. She was pregnant. Panic gripped her. She sat on the bathroom floor with the test in her hand, breath shallow, mind racing. The silence inside the apartment was deafening. There was no one to call, no voice to calm her. With trembling fingers, she opened her laptop and wrote an email to Nathan. Then another. And another. Each more desperate, more fragile than the last. She waited days, then a week. Still nothing. She went to his family's estate, only to learn that the Collins had gone to Europe. She tried the company, no answer. To the world, Nathan Collins had disappeared, and with him every piece of the life she had once imagined. She quietly dropped out of university, never returning to campus. No celebration, no cap and gown, no goodbyes. Just silence. She had no family to turn to. Her parents had died in a car accident years ago. Olivia packed what little she had and moved to a quiet coastal town where no one knew her past. She found work at a small gym, rented a modest one-bedroom apartment above an old bookstore, and started over. When her daughter was born, Olivia held her close and cried harder than she had ever cried in her life. She named her Sophie in memory of the white lilies Nathan had once given her under the university tree. In Montana, Dylan's journey with Goliath wasn't as simple as expected. The trip back to the farm was less than half a kilometer of relatively flat terrain, but Goliath's condition was worse than Dylan had initially realized. The big horse could only take a few dozen steps before needing to rest. His breathing labored even with minimal effort. But Goliath didn't give up. Every time he stumbled, he caught himself. Every time he had to stop and rest, he would look at Dylan with those extraordinary eyes and then continue forward again. What should have been a 15-minute walk took them nearly 2 hours. But when they finally emerged from the forest and Goliath saw the farm spread out before them, something changed in the horse's posture. His head lifted higher, his ears pricked forward, and Dylan could have sworn he saw recognition in the animal's gaze, not of this particular place, but of what it represented. Safety, food, a chance to heal, a chance to trust again. Settling Goliath required all the skill Dylan could muster. The old barn hadn't housed horses in over a decade, and most of the stalls needed urgent repairs before they could safely house an animal of Goliath's size. Dylan spent that first day patching holes in the walls, spreading fresh hay, and setting up a makeshift water system using garden hoses and plastic buckets. When Benjamin Whitmore returned that evening from his weekly trip to town, he stopped dead at the sight of the massive black horse standing in his barn. At 72, Benjamin had seen enough of life to know that surprises usually meant trouble. But when Dylan explained how he had found Goliath in the forest, the old farmer's furrowed face softened with something Dylan rarely saw there. Real emotion. "Son," Benjamin said quietly, running a gnarled hand along Goliath's neck, "I've been around horses all my life, and I can tell you something about this horse. This is no ordinary animal. This is the kind of horse you might meet once in a lifetime if you're lucky." Dylan felt a warmth in his chest at the old man's words. He had feared that Benjamin would want him to find another place for Goliath, or even be angry about the unexpected addition. Instead, the farm owner was looking at the big horse with something close to admiration. But Dylan, Benjamin continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Taking care of an animal like this won't be cheap. He'll need special feed, veterinary care, probably therapy to fully recover. Are you sure you're ready for such a responsibility? Dylan looked at Goliath, head lowered, those amber eyes half closed in what resembled contentment. The horse's ribs were still visible under his coat. The wounds on his neck were still raw and red, and Dylan had no idea how much it would cost to restore him to health. By any practical measure, keeping Goliath was probably the worst financial decision he could make. I'm sure, Dylan said simply, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The first week was critical. Local veterinarian Dr. Patricia Vance made emergency visits every other day to check Goliath's wounds and monitor his condition. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had been treating farm animals for over 20 years, and she didn't sugarcoat the situation. Severely malnourished, she told Dylan after her first examination. His digestive system will take time to readjust to regular feeding. You can't just throw hay at him and expect him to recover. This is going to be a long process, and there's no guarantee he'll fully recover. But Dr. Vance also saw something hopeful in Goliath. Despite his weakened condition, the horse's spirit wasn't broken. He patiently submitted to her examinations, allowed his wounds to be cleaned and bandaged without flinching, and showed none of the fear or aggression she typically saw in mistreated animals. Most horses that have been through what he's been through become nearly impossible to handle, she explained to Dylan as she wrapped fresh bandages around Goliath's neck. But this horse seems to understand that we're trying to help him. That's unusual, and a very good sign. Dylan established a careful routine designed around Goliath's recovery. Early morning feedings of specially formulated feed in small portions, followed by gentle walks around the pasture to build the horse's strength. Afternoon sessions where Dylan groomed Goliath and cleaned his wounds, talking quietly about everything that came to mind, the weather, the other animals on the farm, childhood memories, hopes for the future. Goliath seemed to look forward to these sessions, whinnying softly when he saw Dylan approaching with grooming supplies. The big horse would stand perfectly still as Dylan ran the brush through his coat, eyes half closed in what appeared to be pure contentment. Sometimes Dylan would catch himself telling Goliath things he hadn't told any other living being, about his fears, his regrets, his hopes that maybe this time he was doing something right. As the days passed, Goliath began to transform. The hollow places on his sides began to fill in as his body adjusted to regular meals. The wounds on his neck healed cleanly, leaving scars that would always be visible but no longer caused him pain. Most remarkably, his coat began to take on a shine, making him look like a horse carved from polished stone. But the most striking change was in Goliath's behavior. The quiet, patient resignation that had characterized his first days on the farm slowly gave way to something Dylan never expected to see: playfulness. Goliath would run to the fence when Dylan appeared in the pasture, tossing his big head and whinnying like an overgrown puppy. He developed a habit of gently tugging Dylan's jacket with his teeth, a game that never failed to make Dylan laugh. One morning in early November, when Dylan arrived at the barn, he found Goliath standing at his stall door, impatiently stamping the ground. When Dylan opened the gate, instead of walking calmly to the feed bin as usual, Goliath burst past him and actually ran, galloping across the pasture, tail high and powerful legs eating up the ground with a grace that took Dylan's breath away. For the first time, Dylan was seeing Goliath as he was meant to be, not as a victim or a rescue case, but as a magnificent creature in his prime, powerful and proud and fully alive. The sight brought tears to his eyes, and he found himself both laughing and crying as he watched the big horse run. News about Goliath spread through Copper Ridge at the speed that news travels in small communities, and before long, people began finding excuses to pass by Whitmore Farm for a glimpse of the legendary horse. Stories grew with each telling, as stories do, but the core facts remained consistent. Dylan Cross had found a dying horse and somehow brought it back from the brink of death. Some of the visitors were just curious, but others came with more complex motivations. Marcus Williams, a local youth with a reputation for trouble with alcohol and petty crime, started showing up at the farm after school. At first, Dylan was suspicious. Marcus had a reputation as a troublemaker, and Dylan worried he might try to harm Goliath or cause problems. But Marcus surprised him by asking if there was any work he could do on the farm in exchange for being allowed to spend time with the horse. Dylan put him to work cleaning stalls and repairing fences, figuring the kid would lose interest after a day or two of hard labor. Instead, Marcus threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised everyone who knew him. He came every day after school and worked until dark, never complaining about the heavy physical labor or the smell of the barn. More importantly, Marcus began to change. The anger that seemed to radiate from him began to fade. It was replaced by a quiet focus that his teachers had never seen. His grades improved, he stopped getting into fights, and the local sheriff's department noticed that the petty vandalism and theft that had been plaguing the area suddenly decreased. One evening, Dylan found Marcus sitting in Goliath's stall, his back against the wall and the big horse's head resting gently in his lap. The boy was talking quietly, and Dylan caught fragments of what he said. Confessions about feeling lost, admissions that he was afraid of the future, promises that he would do better if he could just figure out how. Goliath listened with the patience of a priest hearing confession, amber eyes never leaving the boy's face. When Marcus finished talking, the horse nudged him gently, and Dylan saw tears streaming down the young man's cheeks. The transformation in the community was subtle but undeniable. People who had been feuding for years found themselves standing side by side at Goliath's fence, united in their admiration for the magnificent animal. Children who were afraid of horses begged their parents to introduce them to Goliath. Adults who hadn't smiled in months found themselves grinning like fools as they watched the big horse play in the pasture. Dr. Vance noticed the change too. "I've been treating animals in this county for 20 years, she told Dylan during one of Goliath's routine checkups, and I've never seen anything like this. Your horse is like some kind of therapy animal, but nobody trained him for it. It's just natural." Dylan was beginning to understand that Goliath was truly something special, something beyond his previous experience or understanding. The horse had an intuitive ability to sense what each person needed and provide exactly that. Whether it was patience for a frightened child, steady companionship for a troubled youth, or simple acceptance for adults who felt lost and alone. But Goliath's deepest impact was on Dylan himself. For the first time in years, Dylan found himself looking forward to getting up in the morning. His days had structure and purpose beyond simple survival. The constant anxiety that had been his companion for so long began to lift as he watched Goliath grow stronger and more confident. The financial burden of caring for Goliath should have been overwhelming, but somehow it worked. Benjamin Whitmore quietly raised Dylan's salary, claiming it was payment for the extra work that came from caring for the horse. Dr. Vance began offering discounted rates for Goliath's care, saying it was her contribution to the most interesting case of her career. Feed suppliers offered discounts, farriers worked for low fees, and somehow the money was always there when it was needed. More importantly, Dylan was beginning to feel like he belonged somewhere again. The steady stream of visitors who came to see Goliath meant he was interacting with more people than he had in years. And surprisingly, he found himself enjoying the conversations. People asked questions about Goliath's background, care, and training, and Dylan discovered he had knowledge and insights worth sharing. "You know, son," Dylan said as he filled Goliath's water trough, "I thought I was rescuing you that day in the forest, but maybe you're rescuing me." Goliath whinnied softly and rested his big head on Dylan's shoulder, and Dylan could have sworn the horse understood exactly what he was saying. As winter gave way to spring, Goliath's fame continued to grow. The local newspaper published a feature article about him, and soon Dylan was receiving phone calls from as far away as California, people wanting to bring their children, parents, siblings to meet Goliath. Dylan found himself saying yes more often than he should, partly because he couldn't bring himself to turn away people who were so clearly desperate for help, and partly because he was in awe of Goliath's consistent ability to provide exactly what each person needed. The horse seemed to have an unlimited capacity for empathy, an intuitive understanding of human pain, and an ability to offer comfort without judgment. Each story amazed Dylan, but what amazed him even more was the change in himself. Something unexpected had happened. He had become not just Goliath's caretaker, but the caretaker of all the hurting people who came seeking the horse's healing presence. Benjamin Whitmore watched these developments with growing admiration. "Son," he said to Dylan one evening as they watched Goliath grazing in the sunset-painted pasture, "you've found your calling. This isn't just about taking care of a horse anymore. This is about something bigger." Dylan knew Benjamin was right, but the implications of that realization were both exciting and frightening. If he was going to do this, he would do it right, and if he was going to help more people, he would create a real program. He would need better facilities, trained staff, insurance, formal protocols. It meant transforming into something much more complex and challenging than a farm worker caring for a special horse. That night, Dylan made a decision that would change the trajectory of his life. He called Benjamin Whitmore into the kitchen and presented him with a proposal that was equal parts ambitious and terrifying. He wanted to establish a formal therapeutic program with Goliath as the cornerstone. He wanted to bring in additional horses, train volunteers, create a facility that could serve people across the region. Benjamin listened with growing excitement, and when Dylan finished speaking, the old farmer leaned back in his chair and grinned. "Son," he said, "I've been waiting my whole life for someone with a vision like this to come along. Let's make it happen." Within 6 months, Goliath Recovery Ranch was formally established as a non-profit organization. Benjamin donated 40 acres of his land to the program, and donations began coming in from people who had heard Goliath's story or been touched by his healing presence. A local construction company volunteered to build proper facilities, including accessible pathways with special equipment for working with people with disabilities. Additional horses were carefully selected and trained to work alongside Goliath, though none quite matched his intuitive understanding of human need. Volunteers were hired and trained, therapy protocols were developed, and partnerships were established with hospitals, mental health centers, and veterans organizations throughout the region. But at the center of it all remained Goliath, the magnificent black horse who had been abandoned with a note saying his owner couldn't handle him. Too big, too wild, too much trouble. Every morning, Dylan would find Goliath waiting at his pasture gate, ready for another day of healing work, amber eyes shining with what could only be described as purpose. The silence in the gym was deafening. Olivia still couldn't move, the water bottle lying at her feet. Nathan sat on the bench, his face drained of all emotion, and between them, Sophie stood, her small finger still touching the moon-shaped birthmark behind her own ear. "Olivia," Nathan finally whispered, "please." But the words wouldn't come to her. 7 years. 7 years without responding to messages, calls, pleas. And now he was here, in front of her daughter, expecting answers. Sophie looked between them both, growing confusion in her eyes. "Mom? Is this really my father?" Olivia felt a lump in her throat. She slowly nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, it is." Sophie turned to Nathan, tilting her head. "Why did you never come?" Nathan knelt down, bringing himself to Sophie's level. "Because I didn't know where your mother was," he said softly. "I tried to find them, but I couldn't. But now I've found you, and I'm never leaving again." Olivia looked away, tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to believe. God, she wanted to believe, but she was afraid. Afraid for Sophie, for herself, for the life they had carefully built. "Nathan," she said quietly, "you can't just come here and say everything's going to be okay. It's been 7 years. Sophie doesn't know you. She stopped, her voice breaking. Nathan stood up, took a step closer. "I know," he said. "I know I'm late. I know I left you alone. But if you'll let me, I want to make it up to you, however long it takes." Sophie gently tugged on Nathan's sleeve. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Will you really stay?" Nathan looked at the child, at those eyes carrying amber tones, at a piece of himself. "Yes," he whispered. "I promise." The following days were filled with uncertainty. Nathan stayed at a small motel outside town, but returned to the gym every day, not to demand answers, but to be there, to listen when Sophie talked to him, to give Olivia the space she needed. At first, Olivia remained distant, but she watched Nathan interact with Sophie. She saw how patient he was as he built puzzles with her, the way he read her bedtime stories, how the big, confident CEO melted as if enchanted by every word of a little girl. And something inside her began to soften. One afternoon, Sophie ran to Nathan after daycare and wrapped her arms around him. "Daddy," she said, as naturally as if the word had always been there, "will you come to the park with me?" Nathan looked at Olivia, silently asking permission. Olivia hesitated, then nodded. And so they went, the three of them together, like a family. At the park, as Sophie swung on the swings, Nathan and Olivia sat on a bench, the distance between them still there, but smaller than before. "Tell me about your father," Nathan said quietly. "William, I knew what he was doing, but I couldn't stop him. He controlled me, Olivia. Even if you let go, he didn't." Olivia looked at him, saw the pain in his face. "Is sorry enough?" she asked. 7 years, Nathan. 7 years I was alone." "No," he said. "I don't know if it's enough. But it's a start, and I want to show you. You and Sophie are everything to me. I'd give up everything, the company, the money, all of it. I just want a chance." Olivia looked away, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't let you hurt her again," she whispered, "or hurt me." Nathan put his hand over hers lightly. "I won't," he said. "I promise." Weeks passed and Nathan stayed. He canceled meetings, postponed flights, told his assistant to let others run the company until further notice. For the first time, Nathan Collins's world wasn't revolving around work. It was revolving around his family. Nathan's phone rang on Tuesday morning. It was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Sophie's child therapist. "Nathan," she said, "I'm concerned about Sophie's behavior. She seems depressed, not eating, not sleeping. The sudden change, reconnecting with you has affected her. I recommend therapy." Nathan's heart sank. "What kind of therapy?" "There's something called equine therapy," Dr. Mitchell explained, "working with horses. It's incredibly effective for children who have experienced trauma, and I heard there's an excellent program in Montana. It's called Goliath Recovery Ranch." Nathan noted the name and hung up. Minutes later, he was at his computer, researching the program. And there, on the front page of the website, was a photo of a magnificent black horse, Goliath. 2 weeks later, Nathan, Olivia, and Sophie flew to Montana. They rented a small car and drove toward Copper Ridge, the landscape transforming along the highway into wide-open pastures and mountains. Sophie was quiet in the back seat, her head leaning against the window, watching outside. She hadn't talked much since Nathan's return. The initial excitement had faded, replaced by real weight. For 7 years she hadn't had a father, and now that she didn't know how to feel. When they arrived at Goliath Recovery Ranch, Dylan met them at the main gate. He was in his 40s, weathered and kind. "Welcome," he said with a warm smile. "Sophie, right?" Sophie nodded, shy. Dylan knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "There's someone very special waiting to meet you," he said. "His name is Goliath, and he'd love to meet you." Sophie's eyes widened a bit, the first spark of curiosity. They walked into the facility, Dylan explaining the program along the way. But Nathan wasn't listening. He was watching Olivia, the way she looked around them, at the horizon, at the land, with something he hadn't seen in a long time: hope. When they reached the main pasture, Goliath was there, waiting by the fence as if he knew they were coming. Sophie stopped, intimidated by the horse's size, but Goliath didn't move. He just waited patiently, those amber eyes focused on the child. And then Sophie took a step forward, then another, until she stood at the fence, looking up at Goliath. The horse lowered his head, bringing his nose close to Sophie's, and the little girl, almost thoughtlessly, raised her hand and touched him. "Hello, Goliath," she whispered. Goliath whinnied softly, and for the first time in weeks, Sophie smiled. The following days were a blur. Sophie spent every morning with Goliath, talking to the horse, reading him books, sitting beside him in the pasture, and each day she opened up a little more. Dylan had long conversations with Nathan and Olivia about Goliath's past, about the program, about the journey of healing, and for the first time in years, Nathan felt truly at peace. One evening, as the sun was setting, Nathan and Dylan stood by the pasture, watching Goliath play with Sophie. "How did you do it?" Nathan asked. How did you build all this? Dylan shrugged. One step at a time, he said, and with a lot of help. Benjamin gave me a chance, Dr. Vance believed, and Goliath. Goliath gave me a reason to live. Nathan nodded, understanding Dylan's words. I felt lost too, he admitted, for years, but now I have a purpose. Sophie, Olivia, they're my everything. Dylan smiled. Hold on to them, he said, at any cost. By the end of the week, Sophie had transformed. She was laughing, talking, back to life. And Nathan and Olivia felt like a family for the first time. Before leaving Montana, the three of them went to visit Goliath one last time. Sophie hugged the horse's neck, whispering to him, Thank you, Goliath. Thank you for healing me. Goliath lowered his head as if understanding, and Nathan, holding Olivia's hand, watching Sophie laugh, finally felt like he had come home. 6 months later, Nathan and Olivia got married. A small ceremony, just close friends and family. And of course, Sophie, beaming as she walked down the aisle as the flower girl on her father's arm. Nathan resigned from his position as company president, but didn't leave. Instead, he dedicated himself to social responsibility programs, especially supporting Goliath Recovery Ranch. He made a large donation, helping to expand the facilities, more horses, more staff, helping more children and families. And every summer, they would visit Montana. Sophie would eagerly await seeing Goliath, catching up with Dylan and Benjamin, and resting under the wide sky. One evening, as the sun set, as Nathan and Olivia watched Goliath gently trot into the pasture, Dylan joined them with a newspaper in his hand. You should see this, he said, handing the newspaper to Nathan. Nathan looked at the headline. Tech CEO Collins donates millions to rural therapy programs. He smiled. The right path, he said. Dylan nodded. Yes, he said, the right path. And in the pasture, Goliath raised his head and whinnied, as if in approval. 2 rescue stories had been completed. Dylan had found an abandoned horse and found purpose. Nathan had found his lost family and come home. And Goliath, the horse who was told he was too big, too wild, too much trouble, had become a healer for everyone, a sign of hope, proof that second chances were possible. This incredibly magnificent story proves that even the most broken souls can have extraordinary healing potential. If this story touched you, please hit the like button, share this message of hope with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of second chances and unexpected miracles. Let us know in the comments below which part of Goliath's story touched your heart the most. Your support means everything to us and helps us continue sharing these life-changing stories. Thank you. Discussion question. If you were in Dylan's place, would you have called the authorities for help, or would you have taken on the care yourself like Dylan did? Write in the comments, I'm really curious.